Episode 32 of the Talkin' Pop podcast. Guys, we are just around the corner from the release of Top Gun Maverick. One of our most anticipated films of 2022.
My most.
Oh, yeah. Oh, your most. Look at that.
Most.
Wow.
The movie that I like. Do you know when you just see a trailer for something or there's been hype around something for so long? You have a gut instinct that I'm just going to love this movie. Mm-hmm. That's this movie in everything I've heard.
Well, we're going to talk about it a little later. And based on the early Rotten Tomatoes reviews, you are not the only one that is going to love this movie. But first, we need to get to our latest Marvel Cinematic Universe installment. The first trailer for She-Hulk, She-Hulk Attorney at Law.
Yes.
Dropped yesterday. And
sure did.
I can't remember Marvel dropping something that was met with such polarizingly opposite views as this. I saw people saying this is fantastic. This is so comic accurate. This is exactly what we want. Oh my God, she's with Mark Ruffalo. Mark Ruffalo's back, etc., etc. And then I saw other people going, this looks horrendous. So we're going to open it up and discuss amongst the three of us.
Yeah.
What did we think of the first trailer for She-Hulk Attorney at Law? Brad, we will start with you.
Oh, we're starting with me. Oh,
we're starting with you.
Oh, geez. All right. Well, it's been the running theme on this podcast that I'm Mr. Positive, Mr. Happy, love everything that comes out. That is not true. And first of all, this is where I prove my point. I don't like the looks of this at all. And listen, if you are somebody who has been a fan of this, comic character and this comic arc and all this kind of stuff, I'm happy for you. I am. So it's like, I didn't grow up with this, number one. But number two, this just looks so silly to me.
Yeah, that is the perfect word. Silly.
Silly. And I get that, like, they're not shying away from it. I understand that. It's not like, some of the complaints we've had about, certain, like, movies like Venom or whatever, where it's kind of like they've taken the character in that direction or whatever. Or like even with Thor, like, but that worked for me. I think it worked for mostly everyone. But this just is not sitting well with me. And I think it's a combination of our conversations that we've had about what's going on with Marvel right now. And is it like, are they kind of oversaturating the market with too much stuff? Whereas before it seemed very kind of like laser focused about what they were going to do in the first phase, second phase, third phase, everything leading up to Endgame. And since then, there's been great movies that have come out, but it's just kind of like, and great shows and whatever, but it's just felt a little, to me, and I think some other people, maybe a little rudderless at times. And this just feels to me, let me be clear, just to me, that it feels a little for the sake of it. We're just doing this because it's a property that we own, and it's like something
more content
we can do.
That we can put on our streaming service.
Correct. It's more stuff that we can just pump into the streaming service, and people will watch, and they will. So they're right. But honestly, if not for this podcast, I'd probably skip it. It does not appeal to me in the slightest. And Disney, listen, do your thing. Marvel, do your thing. There was a couple moments where I was like, oh, Tim Roth is back. That's cool. And then the rest, I was just kind of like, why is Shrek from, the mid 2000s making Fiona? Yeah, sorry, Fiona. Princess Fiona. Like, everybody, like, without fail, everybody jumped on that. Nobody had an original thought. It wasn't like one person thought that. We all jumped on board. Everybody did the same thing. Everybody had the same thought. So, I don't know. Like I said, I've ranted enough. Kelly, take it away.
Kelly, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've had an episode of this show in like a very long time where we haven't been talking about Marvel.
Yeah.
So I do sort of like recognize my own fatigue in this scenario, I guess. Like, it's just, and I have to revisit it. How much of this was impacted by the pandemic and shifting around of schedules and things like that. But this just all feels like a lot, like
Yeah.
one after the other. And I'm kind of with you, Brad, that it's like, and we talked about this last week when we were talking about Doctor Strange, that because phase 4 or phase Wong, as I'm reading it in some articles,
Phase Wong.
Because we don't totally know where we're headed, there's inclinations of where we might be headed, but because we don't totally know, and because we don't have like a core team, and it just feels a little aimless, kind of to your point, Brad. Like it feels like content for the sake of content. Now, that being said, that's kind of what comic books are. You pick up a story and you dabble over there for a bit, and then you put it down, and then you go over here and you listen to this person's story for a little bit. So I'm torn a little bit, because there's part of me that thinks like, I can't sit here and be pissed off that they're not carbon copying the formula that they did to lead up to Endgame, because that would be, you know what I mean? And then we'd all be sitting here saying, oh, they're just doing the same thing again. But for some reason, this just, the tones of like the tones of these different shows and these different movies are a little all over the place. They don't feel like they're a part of the same world anymore. Like,
that's a great point.
That is a really good point.
You know, like it's getting a little bizarre. And, I think addressing the elephant in the room, the CGI looks
horrendous.
I was going to say spotty at best, but let's go for horrendous. And, like realistically, they're doing this show in a kind of shocking revelation, which I didn't realize is 9 episodes. So they're stretching a budget.
That's good at least. But like, where was that? Okay, I'm not gonna. Sorry, Kelly.
Right, and so I don't know. And then so then on the I'll be interested to hear your take on this, Rob. Like on the sort of like interesting side of this, like I'm wondering, some questions that the trailer left me with is like, what's the timeline of this? Because we've got Professor Hulk again.
Yeah.
So I'm like, is this during the blip potentially, which is kind of interesting?
So that actually worries me that you brought that up, Kelly, because I do not want Marvel to fall into the Star Wars trap of messing up the timeline, where this show is post prequel but pre-original trilogy. This show is pre-prequel. This show is after the original like it just confuses people.
Much. Yeah.
And I don't, and Marvel for the most part hasn't done that. The only film they've made that has sort of gone outside of their timeline was Black Widow. That's it.
Yeah.
Everything else is sort of kind of gone chronologically.
Streamline. Yeah.
I don't know. I just think, like, you guys know, I've said it 100 times on this podcast, I don't love any of these shows. Like, I thought Moon Knight was good, was let down by the finale. I came on here and said I loved Loki, but realistically, the only reason why I loved Loki is because He Who Remains was, I was just excited for his reveal. WandaVision was crap. Falcon and Winter Soldier was crap. And Hawkeye was hot, stinking, awful crap. So I don't know. I think we're falling into this trap now where it's about content for the sake of content to put on the streaming service. And what Marvel is doing is they're putting the consumer, us, in a position where people are going to be picky and choosy. And I know that it's like, well, no, you have to watch it because there's going to be some sort of Easter egg leading to the next thing. It's like, well, no, I don't, because there's like 50 different things going on right now. Like what, why? I didn't need to watch WandaVision to know anything about Shang-Chi and the Eternals, right? So it's like, because they're expanding it so greatly, they're just sort of watering it down. That's the perfect way of putting it. It's starting, and I think we've alluded to this before, that it's just starting to feel like a bit of a watered down product at this point, and it's starting, and I feel like you're almost
low. The stakes feel so low. Like
the stakes feel low. I agree.
Yeah. Like even Moon Knight, it's like, we came on here, we liked a lot of the episodes. I was maybe a little harsher than you guys on the show, but overall, like, we thought it was okay. But like, what repercussions does that show have? None.
None. That's what I'm saying. That's why it's like,
you know,
you're making
I
it
know
skippable.
And I know that you didn't like WandaVision, Rob. I was a little bit more favorable to it than you were, but like I will say, at least that show and Loki at least have like had repercussions. It's kind
in
of
the
like
cinematic.
Yeah, these some of these newer characters that they're bringing in, there's just like a bit of a disservice being done to them, where there's sort of these like just these lame, very like. I don't know. Like,
I agree.
Just something about this where I just sort of watched it, and if I look past the atrocious CGI, which is pretty like, and just kind of try and take the rest of it, I still was left being kind of like,
dude, the premise on, if you go on Wikipedia, the premise for this show. Jennifer Walters has a complicated life as a single attorney in her 30s who also becomes the 6'7" green superhero She-Hulk. So it's like, we're also going to watch her date as a She-Hulk.
And listen, I agree. Like, if that's the,
it's true to the comics, but
true to the
it's
comics
just
and stuff,
not
it's just
my
like,
cup of tea.
And listen, it's clearly like this is where I think you start to get into that conversation of mass appeal. Like, who is this for? And like even Stan Lee himself would talk about the fact that these were stories for children. George Lucas used to talk about that with Star Wars. These are stories for children. But at the same time, there's a weight to them that will translate through and appeal to adults. That I think has always been the brilliance of even Disney, like the old like Disney cartoons. It was like the whole family could watch. Well, that meant like, there's parts for the kids, there's parts for the adults, there's stakes, there's whatever. Storylines that make sense for everyone. This is just like we just said, and I'm honestly not even saying it to be funny. Like, it just feels like it's just straight silly. Like when you see a kids show that, and like there was ones that came out in our generation too, but it's like, especially you see it now where it's like, this is just for kids. Yeah. This is just like a straight silly like rush of stuff happening to capture a kid's attention, all happening at the same time. That's what this is starting to give me vibes of, where it's just like, this is just for kids, but they're going to try to tie it in to make it fit in with the rest of it. But it just feels, it doesn't work. It feels like it's getting shoehorned in.
Can I say something that really worries me? Like really, really worries me.
Well, keeps you have to now.
Yeah,
keeps
like
you up at night.
It is going to keep me up. This is called She-Hulk Attorney at Law.
Oh, I know what you're already worried about. I already know.
Are they, to Brad's point, in this children's show, this very junior, silly Billy show, going to bring in Daredevil?
Yeah, I think that's the legitimate possibility.
And it's like, like
listen. If it's just a straight Matt Murdock cameo, I'll let it slide. Like if he's in it for like a couple scenes for one episode, just straight up as Matt Murdock, and he interacts with her here and there, I'll let it slide. But if they're gonna do the full-on Daredevil fights alongside She-Hulk, no, don't do that.
No, I'm not into
don't
it.
Do that.
Like, but see, this is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. I'm like, I get that you own these properties, and I get so okay. I also think that this is a good example, and I kind of alluded to it before when I said like, they did this with Chris Hemsworth's Thor, where it was like they were trying to make him maybe a more serious character in a world that like was very tongue-in-cheek at times, and instead of dialing it down like they did originally, they actually dialed it up with him and made it more like silly and fun, but still had the him being the strongest Avenger and all these kinds of things, right? And it just feels like now, because that worked so well, that now they're going, oh, well, we can do this with all of the characters.
Well,
in some way, like that's what I'm getting from a lot of this. And it's just kind of like,
last thing on this, because we got to move on, but Kevin Feige has been vocal about wanting these shows to appeal to different audiences and like wanting them to like sort of touch different genres. So that's cool, but the problem with that is you put people in a position now where, like I said, if we weren't doing this podcast, I would not be in a rush to watch this. I might not even watch it at all. unless one of you guys hit me up and say, "Oh my god, you have to watch it. There's a major development," and then I'll go out of my way to watch it.
Yeah.
So we'll just have to wait and see how this goes. Watch this show will come out, and we'll all come on here after it comes out and be like, "That was so good."
Well, that's what I was
You
gonna
can't-
say. To leave it on a positive note, just to leave it on a positive note, there's always a chance it's good, and we're
Yes.
just way off base.
Yes.
And listen, nobody hopes for that outcome more than me with every
Yeah.
production, because again, nobody goes into making something like this like thinking it's gonna be bad. Of course, they want it to be good, but it's
Mhm.
just like, who's this going to appeal to and whatever. But like we said, there's there's a lot of like little Easter egg things throughout and rumors about things that maybe will help guide this in the right direction. And maybe this trailer was just trying to set it up as kind of like something very different for the first time. I don't know. Let's see. We'll just have to wait and see. We'll watch it. We'll be on here talking about it. So tune in.
We sure will. So as I said earlier, we are just over a week out from the theatrical release of Top Gun Maverick, Brad's most anticipated movie of the year.
IMAX.
So just between you and me, guys, I took a peek at that. It hasn't come out yet, but I took a peek at that soundtrack on iTunes today.
Yee.
Track number 2 on that soundtrack got
Oh,
me
okay.
really, really excited.
All
okay,
right.
All right.
I'll leave it at that.
You're going to the gym and listening to track 2.
Top Gun Maverick currently has a 97% critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes. That is a very good sign because we've discussed ad nauseum like the difference in those and
Right.
how critics say to everything and whatever. So
Yes.
because we're on the cusp of seeing Pete Maverick Mitchell on the big screen again, we thought it would be fun this week to do our top 5 Tom Cruise movies. We were texting earlier today, and when you pull up his filmography, you're just like, whoa. Like,
Man.
you think Tom Cruise's like history.
forget.
And then you look at it and you're like, my God, this guy's been in so many good movies and so many like movies I forgot about. And like, man, it's incredible. So the way this is going to work is we're each going to have our list of 5. Kelly's going to go first. If somebody says a movie that's on your list, then you chime in and say, yep, that's on my list, and we'll have a group discussion about it. And that's how it's going to work. So as I said, drum roll, please. Without further ado, Kelly, we'll start with you. Your number 5 on your list of Tom Cruise movies.
This won't be on your guys' list. And
Okay.
I'm just going to apologize to everyone because I know that I'm probably going to get some heat for this. But there's a little bit of recency bias. I watched this movie recently just by happenstance. And every time Tom Cruise is on the screen in this movie, I just sit with a grin across my face.
Oh, I know
And
exactly what you're going to say.
I'm trying to
So number 5
Oh my
is
God.
Tom Cruise as Stacy Jacks in Rock of Ages.
Oh God.
I knew you were going to say that. He is.
Him
is
in that
hilarious.
role though. Him in
Yes.
that role.
So
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to be clear.
Okay.
My list,
He is
fair.
hysterical in that role.
my
Yeah.
list is not based on these being the best movies. These are my favorite kind of Tom Cruise performances within movies. So that's how I'm playing the game. You guys
Alright.
can play it differently. But this movie is not that great of a movie, but Tom Cruise elevates it to just such a great
level.
level. He
Yeah.
goes for it. Like, I think sometimes, and I think this will be like a pretty frequent topic of conversation as we go through, is like, because he's carved himself this niche of being like the action guy and the
Yeah.
guy who does his own stunts and all that stuff, like, you kind of forget sometimes that he has these chops and has time and
Legit.
again displayed these chops of
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
Yes.
comedic and being quirky or out of the box or like downright just horrible, which will appear again on my list a little bit later. But this, like, he sings in this movie, he's walking around with his pet monkey, like, he does just
No,
an
he filled the role.
absolute he
I-
does an absolute fantastic cover of Pour Some Sugar on Me by Def Leppard. So
He did all the
number
own,
5.
didn't he
Rock
do all
of
his own singing too? I'm pretty sure he did.
Yeah. Like like honestly, he goes for, and then he goes for it in this movie, and then you have like veterans like Catherine Zeta-Jones, like, playing off of him and him coming in as, like, the sort of sex god, and she's, like, the
Yeah.
uptight housewife who, like, he thrusts and she's like, "Ah!" Like, it's just Anyway, if I hadn't watched that movie recently, might not be my
I'll
vibe, but
accept
for
that
right
answer.
now,
Yeah, I'll accept that answer. For the
That was
record,
surprising.
Rock of Ages was released in 2012, directed by Adam Shankman, and has a 43% on Rotten Tomatoes.
deservedly so.
Yes,
Probably.
yeah.
God, that was 10 years ago? That movie's a
Yep.
decade old. Oh, God, that makes me
Yeah.
feel old.
Okay, Brad, over to you. I think you should tell us first, like, do what Kelly just did and tell us first your criteria for selecting.
I was going to say this too. I'm glad you kind of teed that off with your explanation too, Kelly. Because I think we all may have kind of gone about this a slightly different way. So
Yes.
Because there were, especially when I was trying to put certain movies in order, I was kind of like, some of them were so close for me, just based on likability and things like that alone, that I had to add some criteria as far as like, how the hell do I order these? So for me, it really came down to likability of the movie / lovability. I think I told you guys that. And then also just overall performance. So not only, was he good in it? Because again, like Tom Cruise has pretty much been a sure bet in almost all of the movies he's done. But the thing for me was always just kind of like, I've always been a big Tom Cruise defender, where some people say like, he does the same kind of movies or he does like whatever. And it's like, he's a much underappreciated actor as there comes.
That's what Kelly was. That's why Kelly chose Rock of Ages.
Yeah, no, but honestly, just things like
I'm
that.
not apologizing.
Yeah, his big thing throughout his career has always just been like he's such a huge movie fan. Like dating back to him being a kid, like he's got all these stories of just being obsessed with movies and just wanting to make movies that really appealed to a lot of people that had all these stories. And it wasn't always just about like maybe Oscar chasing and things like that, which is fine. There's been a lot of actors that have done that, and the movie ended up being good too, but there's also been the opposite. So I just thought, I've always kind of appreciated the fact that he's tried to make movies that appealed to people.
Yes.
And wasn't always necessarily just about him. So that being said, he's very underrated. And so that's kind of how I listed them out, like where his performance listed in totality. But okay, so I'll give you number 5. Number 5, and I think this one's gonna maybe make Rob laugh a little bit because I think we have a bit of a connection with this one as well. Was Interview with a Vampire.
Ah, classic. My fiance and I watched that, like, I want to say, like in the middle of like COVID lockdown, we watched that, and I was like, this is a good movie.
First of all, I'm a huge target for anything that's kind of like a period piece, but also like anything that's got like a dark period piece kind of feel, like Jack the Ripper, like something along those lines. It's very like period and dark of that nature. And when you start to hear who was almost cast in Tom Cruise's role, people like, Gary Oldman or Johnny Depp and things like that, people that kind of like really kind of come to your mind when you think of like a vampire, an actor who could play a vampire. I don't think a lot of people thought Tom Cruise at that time.
No.
And knowing the kind of performance that he actually did give in that and the scale of that movie at the time, that movie scared the crap out of me when I was a kid.
Oh, dude, it is. I could totally see that.
It is highly creepy. And there's a scene in particular. And again, I went back in my mind and I was kind of thinking like, okay, well, like what scenes can I like really think about from these movies that I've chosen to rank the way that I have? What scenes like really grabbed me? And there is a scene with Tom Cruise in Interview with a Vampire where he has brought, I think, a prostitute up, and he's kind of like messing with her, as far as like he kind of like drinks her blood and then is like messing with her. And it is a very dark and creepy scene, and he plays it so sociopathically that he's just like playing with his food. And it's just like the creepiest scene. And I just think it's he played it so perfectly. And it made me appreciate, and I remember seeing him in that role as a kid and just being like, this is
terrifying.
Okay. I would have never thought Tom Cruise would have pulled something like that off just based on my own naivety as a kid, not knowing that I'd seen him in something similar to that.
The cast of that movie as a whole, too. Brad Pitt,
Amazing.
Tom Cruise, Kirsten Dunst, Christian Slater, Antonio Banderas. Like,
Oh,
they're like underrated, like super cast of that movie.
Kirsten Dunst in that movie too
Is a child.
She is a child.
Yes.
And she gives a very creepy performance. Brad Pitt, like you said, all of the Antonio Banderas is very creepy in that. And anyways, that is my number 5. Super underrated. For some reason, if you haven't seen that movie, go back and watch it. It's very good.
Interview with a Vampire, directed by Neil Jordan, released in 1994, 64% on Rotten Tomatoes. Okay.
That's a bad score. That's a stupid score, in my opinion.
Criteria for my list was how much I enjoy these movies from start to finish. My list is very eclectic. I think I'm going to surprise you guys with a couple of my choices.
Okay.
But it's just, I did it from the standpoint of I can start this movie and from the moment it starts to the moment it ends, I enjoy it. And if it's on TV or if I stumble on it, I'm always going to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
So number 5 for me is A Few Good Men. Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, Demi Moore, Kevin Bacon, released in 1992, directed by Rob Reiner, 83% on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. Yeah, you can't handle the truth,
dude.
Tom, like it's
all-time great.
It's super compelling story. It's not an action movie. A lot of the tension takes place in the courtroom. Jack Nicholson plays like a ruthless, like army lieutenant who is like aware of what's gone on with these soldiers being murdered. And Tom Cruise is like the young hotshot military attorney who's like interrogating him. Just fantastic all the way around. I love that movie. And all you got is like just Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson. Like you can't go wrong.
This was I was moving it in and out of my top 5. So this is
really okay.
This is a 5.5 for me.
Oh, didn't make the top 5
didn't
for
make
Kelly.
the top 5, but like I explained my criteria, okay?
No,
like,
I get
that's
no judgment. This is a judgment-free zone.
Yeah, it was
so
pinching in and out.
A Few Good Men is my number 5. Kelly, your number 4.
So when I was talking about him and his acting chops, I alluded to the fact that he sometimes plays a terrible person. So my number 4 is Tom Cruise as Frank T.J. Mackey in Magnolia.
Wow. Yeah.
Nice.
Just because, again, I just think that this is like one of those performances where it's him subverting expectations of who Tom Cruise is, right? Mm-hmm. And I wish I could sit here and quote some of the things that some of the outrageous things that he says in this movie. If anybody has not seen this movie, just go and watch clips of it. It is absolutely insane. He's been quoted as saying that this is, something that he considers one of his best performances, one of his favorite, roles that he's taken on. So yeah, that one, I just, based on the criteria of his performance, I just like how surprising this one is. And I love
it's been a hot minute since I've watched Magnolia.
I was going to say, I'm doing a quick search here because that was probably the one that I was putting in and out of my top 5. It didn't make my top 5.
Released in 1999, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, and has an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes. Brad, your number 4 Tom Cruise, all-time Tom Cruise movie.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt because I know we were supposed to jump in though, but my number 4 was A Few Good Men.
Okay, nice.
So we won't beat it to death, but like clearly, like everything we just talked about, I know this is about Tom Cruise, and I'm going to keep it about Tom Cruise, but we didn't mention him. Low key, fantastic performance in that movie because everybody always talks about obviously Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise is Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Bacon, yes.
Kevin Bacon as the prosecution, or excuse me, as the defense,
yes.
prosecution,
defense.
Whatever the other side.
We didn't give him his cred. You're right.
He 6 degrees of second Kevin Bacon.
Yes, but he plays such a good opposite and kind of the straight man, if you will, to Tom Cruise's like more like in your face. He's that kind of like rigid, what you would expect to be that kind of stoic military lawyer. And he just that banter that they all have, the dynamic between the three of them especially in like the redirects and the objections and the this, that, and the next thing, like, and even the private conversations that they have together, fantastic. But Tom Cruise, again, in that movie, he just has this ability to do these kinds of performances where I just believe that he is that character. And I know that seems to a lot of people is just kind of like, well, he's just being himself. Try and be natural on film and see how it comes off. Because the ability to step into a role where you come off as like convincing, but like kind of like the very relatable every man, if you know what I'm saying. This was the role for me that I was kind of like, this is him. This is the role that he really kind of showed that off and flexed that muscle of just being like, I just believe that you're this kind of guy who just happens to be got caught up in this situation.
My number 4, and I'm gonna go off the board for this one, but I'm sorry, I love this movie, Edge of Tomorrow.
Okay. Yes.
Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. This was sort of Tom Cruise like 2010, like sort of resurgence.
Yep.
I love the premise and the concept of this movie where he just keeps, every time he dies, he just, like, the original title for this movie, I believe, was called Live, Die, Repeat.
There was even now people get confused what you're talking about with that movie.
Because I think potentially, check me in the comments, folks, but like, I think actually it was released under that title maybe elsewhere in the world, like in the UK or something like that. And so that's why they get a little confused.
Yeah.
I love the premise. I love that he starts out as like this like twerpy military guy who has like no combat experience and is just like such a weasel. And then like as the movie goes on, he turns into the Tom Cruise that we all know and love. Bill Paxton as Master Sergeant Farrell in this movie is outstanding. Like yelling at him every single time he wakes up, making them eat the cards. Oh yeah, making them eat the cards. Emily Blunt as the sort of badass soldier who helps fight the aliens or whatever they are.
This is why everybody sits around and says, why is Emily Blunt not a part of the MCU or a superhero at this point? Like, this was that. I know we're talking about Tom, but like, as an aside, like she's such a badass in this movie.
Yeah.
Edge of Tomorrow was released in 2014, directed by Doug Liman, and has a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I am not the only one who thinks that movie is fantastic.
Yep.
That movie, if that movie is on TV, I'm watching it every single time.
It's funny because he got in like a bit of a sci-fi mode for a little bit there in the kind of the mid 2000s, I guess, or
like
whatever.
War of the Worlds, and
War of the Worlds, Oblivion, then Live, Die, Repeat, or Edge of Tomorrow, whatever, wherever you are in the world and you're hearing this, that's the movie we're talking about.
Yeah.
But no, that movie was super under the radar. I think for a lot of people when it first came out, I couldn't even really tell you why. It just kind of was, even though it looked good at the time. I remember not seeing it in the theater, and then seeing it at home, and being like, "Fuck! I should have watched this in the theater. This was really good. I would have loved to have seen that." And I'm not positive if this is true or not, but as we're talking about this, things are popping in my head. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they may have greenlit a sequel to this. Or they're in production. They might. Somebody is working on something, or there's been rumors that they want to do a sequel.
Yeah,
because it did so well, and it just it went under the radar when it first came out. But upon maybe streaming services and things, maybe that was part of it too. Is like I think it was maybe on one of those at the time when that was kind of a newer novelty or whatever, and a lot of people ended up watching it and got a huge following after.
Yeah, I'm doing admittedly, I'm doing some Googling here. So critically acclaimed, absolutely, as to Rob's point, didn't do well at the box office for what you just said, Brad. Most people watched it at home. And what I'm reading here is that was largely a result of the terrible marketing and the changing title.
See, there you go.
Interesting.
So yeah, like it's kind of a shame that there seemed to
love that movie.
Yeah, I really need to
so much.
Super. If for some reason you haven't seen it, it's wildly, I guess not underrated because the ratings are good. But if you didn't see it for whatever reason, you should
watch it. Yes.
Because it actually, as of now, before Tom Cruise's new movie, Top Gun Maverick comes out, I think that might be his most highly rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm not positive, but I think it is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Kelly, number 3.
Okay, I anticipate you guys are gonna jump in here. I anticipate. If not, we're gonna have to have a conversation. So my number 3, which jumped between 2 and 3, so I'm still not totally sure that I'm comfortable where it is Jerry Maguire.
Jerry Maguire is number 2 on my list.
It missed my list.
Oh,
It missed my list.
Brad,
I'm telling
in my
you.
opinion, this is one of Tom Cruise's best, if not best, all-time performance. I think he is, not to steal your thunder here, Kelly, but he is awesome in this
I know
movie.
that.
Yeah, this is
Awesome.
like
I know that. I'll jump in. Kelly, go, and then I'll
this
tell
is
you why.
like it's just textbook Tom. Like
Yes.
everything that people like about him, like in his just the X factor of Tom Cruise is on full display in this movie. Obviously he was nominated for an Oscar for this performance.
Yeah.
And when I look back at who was nominated and who ultimately won, with no disrespect, I think Tom was robbed. Because you've got Billy Bob Thornton that year for Sling Blade, Woody Harrelson for The People versus Larry Flint. You've got Jeffrey Rush for Shine, and then the winner was Ray Fiennes for The English Patient.
Most overrated movie of all time.
That's a whole other podcast.
That's
a whole
I'm
other podcast,
with you on that.
Time.
Yeah.
I am
Go
with
ahead.
you.
But you know what I love?
This was Tom's time to win an Oscar.
Yes, and Tom Cruise was born to play Jerry Maguire. He's so perfect. There's so many other things I love about this movie too, like Cuba Gooding Jr. Cuba.
I'm calling him Cuba Gooding Jr. from now on.
Cuba Gooding Jr. as Rod Tidwell, the sort of disgruntled NFL receiver. So good. Obviously, Renee Zellweger as Dorothy Boyd. Jerry O'Connell as Frank Cushman, who plays the like quintessential young American quarterback, All-American. But my ultimate favorite character in this movie that is not Tom Cruise's Jerry Maguire is Jay Moore as Bob Sugar. So good.
Oh,
Yeah.
so
The
good.
competing sports agent and how they're both sort of competing for Cush's business. And then when Cush leaves and goes to Bob Sugar, that's sort of the end. Jerry Maguire has to like rebuild himself, and Rod Tidwell stays with him. And it's just such a fantastic, heartwarming story. I love Jerry Maguire. I love it. It's number 2 on my list.
It's a phenomenal movie, and I know for sure people are like, "What the hell?" That it's not in my top 5. And again, it's not that I don't love that movie. It's very much what you guys said. Like if it's on TV, and I go skimming past it or something, I'm watching it. If it comes up in one of the streaming services, I'm watching it. But the thing was, it just for me came down to some nuances with other performances that I thought were better that he might have actually been ignored on, / just the scope of some of these other movies that I've chosen. Like you said, he was so built for that role. That would probably be the only one that I would say.
He looks like a sports agent.
No, he does, but that's I think that's the crux of why I didn't end up putting it in the list, was simply just because I feel like I'm arguing against my point here, but it's like that truly was just like Tom Cruise on film, and that is okay because he does it so brilliantly. It's not a slight in the least, but it was just more that it was like I had to think about like performance and like some of these other ones that he's done, and how much I also liked some of these other movies that did make my top 5 that I was kind of like, oh God, I got to leave it out. And I think I even told you guys today, there was one that I was like, I don't know, I got to try to get it in. I just didn't think I could. And I didn't. It was that one. It was Jerry Maguire.
Directed by Cameron Crowe, released in 1996 and an 84% on Rotten Tomatoes. Okay, fantastic. Brad, number 3 on your list.
I kind of feel like this one, it was going to go either way. I thought either you guys were going to have it or both of you weren't going to have it. The Last Samurai.
Oh, see, that See what you just said about Jerry Maguire's my mentality with this movie.
Interesting.
I love that movie. I love Tom Cruise in that movie. I find that movie to be a little tedious at times and a little slow, but I like it. Like, it's not, like I said, my criteria for this list was like, I'm sitting down and I'm just like enjoying every moment of it. And The Last Samurai does drag in certain parts for me, but that's not to say I dislike the movie. I don't at all. I love it. I think it's really good.
Okay. So here was my thing. I previously mentioned the thing about even part of the reasoning as to why I selected Interview with a Vampire. It wasn't the main criteria, but I love a well done period piece movie, especially something that happens to land with high stakes. So something that in a lot of cases I would say either war is the background, or you're like in the time of war, or you're actually physically a part of that within the storytelling. And I just thought that this was such an interesting story that I felt like I hadn't really seen before. And again, I remember thinking at the time the movie looked good, and I didn't know if Tom Cruise would be able to pull it off. And I think it really just
it's an interesting choice. It is.
It's a very interesting choice. That's what stands out about that movie to me, is I'm like, that was ballsy.
But he plays such an open wound in that movie from almost start to finish. And the acting performances that you get from literally top to bottom in that film, but also I know what you're saying, like there might be some like tedious parts of it. I like a movie that, you know, when there is going to be like a lot of action and there is going to be a lot of, you know, high stakes and things like that, but they take that time to slow it down and make it not art house filmy, but kind of in a way where it was just kind of like they really took their time. And you know, they spoke of things like the cherry blossoms, and like the perfect cherry blossom doesn't exist, and like that kind of like almost poetry in motion with the backdrop of war and everything going on. I just thought was such a poetic film, and he was so good in it. He was so good in it. Especially at the beginning where he's supposed to essentially have this PTSD in reality, that he is this beaten down dog that was forced to do these things that he didn't want to do, but he was he's a man of, you know, the military and was following orders, and him dealing with that in such an interesting way that essentially saw him flip to the other side. I just thought it was such a good movie, and he was so excellent in it that I couldn't not have him in it.
Hey man, it's a great movie. Some legends in this movie too. Ken Watanabe, Hiroki Sanada, like
Ken Watanabe also was nominated for an Oscar that year.
Yeah,
and I truly don't think, and I don't know that he's even said this, but I bet you he would say, you know, a lot of the performance that he gave would have been that back and forth with Tom, because when you have such a intense role like he had in that movie, you got to trust your acting partner, and his acting partner was Tom Cruise in a lot of those scenes, and the way that the two of them played off each other had to be in my top 5 for sure.
Directed by Edward Zwick, released in 2003, 66% on Rotten Tomatoes.
2003. Oh,
I know.
God.
Think about that.
I don't like thinking about that.
So Kelly got her selection that was going to make a lot of the sort of film buffs roll their eyes. So this is my selection that is going to make the film buffs roll their eyes. I don't care. You guys know this. I have said to everyone who will listen that this film is criminally underrated. Okay. Number 3 on my list is Mission Impossible 3.
Oh, yes.
In my opinion.
Good for you putting that in. What?
Dude,
what are you talking about? This is my number 2, baby.
Yeah. Oh yeah, perfect. No, because Kelly, I think people like roll their eyes at Mission Impossible at this point.
No.
This is by far the best of the Mission Impossible movies, in my opinion. I know people point to the first one because the first one has sort of become this sort of like cult 90s movie, and I love the first one, but no, this is Tom Cruise and J.J. Abrams teaming up to right the ship of the silly nonsense that was Mission Impossible 2. Kelly, you referenced Magnolia's earlier, Magnolia, the chemistry that Tom Cruise has with Philip Seymour Hoffman is on full display in this movie. Philip Seymour Hoffman is legitimately frightening in this movie.
I know.
The scene where he has what's her name, Julia, held captive, and he is screaming, "You think I'm playing? You don't think I'll do it?" Is like legitimately frightening, and he's just pure evil, and he's such a great sort of formidable opponent to Ethan Hunt, because there has been other Mission Impossible villains that get a little like silly and eye rolly, like
it's supposed to be that way though. But
John Voight in the first one is good, but it's John Voight.
John Voight's okay.
Yeah.
Don't hate on John Voight.
And then Sean Ambrose in the second one, just.
Yeah, you know what? I would say.
Oh, the second one.
So so part of the reason why Mission Impossible, a Mission Impossible movie was going to be in my top 5.
Yes.
So then I sat down and I thought, okay, which one do I like the best? And I think the reason why this one is my favorite, yes, the first one is a classic, but Tom Cruise and the characterization of Ethan Hunt in that movie, he's not as much of like a badass yet.
Yes.
So I like
but
Tom
they dialed
Cruise.
him back, Kelly, because they really tried to make him badass.
Oh, and then it got
MI2.
silly.
Yes.
This one is like the perfect sort of like, this one's sort of like the perfect, like, he's a veteran agent. He knows what he's doing, but like he's now in this formidable place. And I also feel like this is the Mission Impossible movie that feels the least like a James Bond movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because like there's a much more like emotional stakes with like him actually having the relationship and
grounded.
Like all that. Yeah. Like I
Grounded.
fine. If people don't like this movie, then
no. JJ Abrams does a fantastic job. The ensemble cast is great. Like this is the best of the Mission Impossibles. Yes.
I agree.
Did
100%.
Did Philip Seymour Hoffman ever give a bad performance in his entire career?
I mean,
I don't
think so. And it's fine if you have one, because like, we don't want to speak ill of the dead, but he was just so good. And he was so good in that movie. He was so good.
He's legitimately frightening in that movie. This movie also saw the no, it's not true. Ving Rhames was in this one, and then he took one off because he was in 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then he took. I'd have to check which one, but this one also has Billy Crudup in it. Like,
yes, like it's really good.
This has Kerry Russell in it.
It does. It does have Kerry Russell.
Oh, so, right, yeah.
Directed by J.J. Abrams and released in 2006, 71% on Rotten Tomatoes. Love that movie. So, Brad, Kelly and I are out of. My 3 was Kelly's 2, and Kelly's 2 was my 3. Or yes,
you got it.
The floor, my friend. Your third favorite Tom Cruise movie.
Was it third, or I thought I was on 2?
Second.
I'm on number 2 now.
Sorry, excuse me.
Oh, it's okay. I thought I blacked out for a second. Okay, so this one, I'm actually I guess this probably based on I could do some math, and I can kind of see where this is going. So I'm assuming that this didn't make your top 5, and this for me had to play, believe it or not, at number 1, but I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, no, you can't.
It had to play.
I would have kicked you off this podcast if number 1 wasn't what
we don't say it. Don't say it. We'll save it. As though the audience doesn't understand what's happening already. Minority Report at number 2.
Oh, dude, great movie. Movie.
Phenomenal.
Yeah,
movie.
Great movie. Yeah. Long movie.
I don't care. It's so good. There's not a moment in that movie that I don't like. I actually think that's one of, if not Steven Spielberg's most underrated movies. Because Steven Spielberg has obviously his filmography just, speaking of people's filmography that just blows your freaking mind. That movie is excellent for so many reasons. The idea of doing a film noir detective story and we know how we like those on this
With
podcast.
a sci-fi twist. Yeah.
Yes. Oh
Yeah.
my God. It's so good. And you're not in that movie thinking this is in your face. I feel like, they're just trying to give me sci-fi for the sake of sci-fi. It's so grounded that you almost forget it's sci-fi at times.
Yep.
That's how good it is. And to me, that is the quintessential part of true sci-fi, is that I almost forget and just accept what's happening. And I think it had echoes of like a Blade Runner at times.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Where it was just like that, again, that kind of grounded, dark, noir, detective story, like all those elements that you wanted. But the stakes were so high. It was so good. And I just thought Tom Cruise, I actually think in that movie, he might have given the performance of his career that went completely by the wayside for I don't know what reason. And
I think when you go extreme sci-fi like that, you do.
But it wasn't extreme sci-fi.
I know, but it looked it, and I think that you alienate certain people. Like my
perhaps
for some reason, if that movie came out today, and I showed my fiance that trailer, she would be like, I don't like sci-fi. Like, and then I'd be like, no, it's not sci-fi, and she'd be like, it looks sci-fi. So I do think the reason why it is more on the underrated side, because I agree with you, is I think when you go. I think a lot of people just maybe saw the trailer and made up their mind, like, I don't want to see this, which was a huge mistake.
Right.
You know what? You know what always stands out to me about that movie too?
What's that?
The sort of coming onto the scene of Colin Farrell.
Correct.
That was
I was getting to all of that. Yeah.
That was right in the era of like Colin Farrell doing Daredevil and The Minority Report and Phone Booth, and
he just would have never known he was Irish. He does such a to this day, obviously.
I remember
such a flawless
his
American
character in Minority Report. I remember being like, this guy is a D-bag.
Oh yeah, but again, like how good is that performance? That you just I always say that in shows where I'm like, I fucking hate this character, and if I hate you that much, I'm like, bravo.
Yes, you're doing a wonderful job.
I'll just say this, because honestly, if you have not seen this movie, I don't want to spoil anything, because I just think that there's certain movies that maybe people forget about, maybe never got around to. So if you haven't, stop listening. But there is a scene near, I would say it's in like the third act of that movie, where Tom Cruise shows everybody why he was a movie star to begin with, because he's a good actor. And it's the scene where he's dealing with the character that is Agatha, and she's one of the in the movie, she plays one of the characters that can see into the future, these future crimes and what have you. And she is describing an alternate reality where his son is alive. And the emotion that runs through Tom Cruise while that is going on, and he doesn't say a word, is acting at its finest. And if you can learn to do that,
you're gold.
You're gold. And it is such a like that. And to me, that's why that is such an underrated performance. And I truly think, I don't even know who won that year. I don't know who was nominated, whatever. I think it could have been at least nomination. That's how good that performance is to me. And just that scene alone.
Directed by Steven Spielberg, released in 2002, 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. The GOAT, John Williams, did the score for this film.
Yeah, he did.
Wow.
Yeah, he did.
Okay, so here we go to number one, and I think it's pretty unanimous across the board. Am I right?
This would be a stupid segue if it wasn't. Yeah.
It's obviously
the reason why.
Well, it's obviously The Outsiders.
I was going to say
The Outsiders. Oh, The Mummy. Yeah, that one's good too.
Oh, yeah, The Mummy. The Mummy, of course.
Vanilla Sky.
Top Gun. It's the reason why we're all here.
Yeah.
But this wasn't, I just think we need to be clear here. This wasn't like we were doing this to be gimmicky and be like, oh, just to set up.
No,
this is our favorite Tom Cruise movie.
Yes.
And I think we all kind of knew that, but there was a chance. And like I said, there was a legitimate chance, because of how much I like Minority Report, that it almost slipped into the top spot. But my heart and soul would have just, I couldn't allow myself to do it. That's how much I love Top Gun.
Top Gun in a lot of ways is the perfect movie because it literally hits on absolutely everything. Anything you want, you
Agreed.
get out of this movie.
I was literally just about to say that if you look at our top fives, it's like I clearly like sort of like cocky, charismatic Tom. Rob, you sort of like action Tom. And Brad, you sort of like deep, thoughtful Tom. And it's like,
Yeah.
and it's all here. It's all
It's
here.
all there.
It's
It's all here.
It's all in
one
Top Gun.
fine package.
And one of the things that if you read the reviews of Top Gun Maverick, one of the reasons why people are liking it so much is because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this movie is hitting on all the same sort of beats and emotions that the original had. And I'm really looking forward to it. We got a few minutes here, so I wanted to do some honorable mentions because as we said, we looked at
I was going to say the same thing.
Yes, we looked at his filmography and it's really, really hard to choose. So I'm going to go with my first honorable mention really quickly. We don't have time to elaborate on them, but I just want to say Rain Man is another movie that when it's on TV, I'm watching it. Love that movie. Kelly, over to you.
I mean, you know, we were chatting a little bit before we hopped on the show. There was a bit of a dispute between the three of us. We don't always get along, and that dispute was because you refused to let me put Tropic Thunder on my list.
No, because he doesn't star in that movie.
He doesn't star in that movie.
You know what? I don't care, damn it. He steals the show.
Okay. Here's what I'll say.
That's my 1.5.
I'm gonna set up a quick random scenario for Kelly. If it was allowed, where would you have had it drop in your top 5?
Like that and the Stacey Jacks performance are kind of there, but then I also have there's a Few Good Men, which like people would just kill me if I put Les Grossman above him in A Few Good Men.
He is so funny in that.
It's so funny. And it was like, it's because I also just can't help but bring in like my personal experience with the movies and also like the world around us. And it was like such a like kind of comeback role for him. Like he'd been a little like
really
out of it for a while. Like he just, hadn't been in
mixed it up.
And so it was just like, and then him like alongside Matthew McConaughey and Bill Hay. Like
it's fantastic.
It's so funny.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Brad, quick honorable mention.
Well, I'll say 2 things. One, and if you haven't gone onto Tom Cruise's IMDb, just go give it a quick skim and go watch a lot of those movies. Because quite honestly, I really don't know that there's if any duds in there. I think they're all worth a watch. But when I was skimming through, the thing that I don't know why it popped in my head, the man has never done a voiceover for anything. He's never done an animated anything. And I just kind of was like, that's kind of weird. Because he was just
Tom strikes me as the kind of guy who has an ego that like he wants to be in front of the camera.
No, and that's fine. And I think that's fair to a degree. But like there's been a lot of megastars that I also think have that same kind of ego that have, even if it was something small, and he just never did. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting, and I'd be kind of down to see some sort of Disney movie with Tom helming the voice. I'd be cool with it. But anyways, that aside, I got to give my honorable mention to War of the Worlds.
Oh, that's an interesting.
War of the Worlds was a movie that was very much plagued by some of the goings on at the time with Tom and some of this falling off. As we don't need to get into it, but and we won't. But that movie was like definitely took a hit, I think, because there was just too much other stuff going on, too much noise. And again, it ended up kind of slipping under the radar. And again, that was another Spielberg. I'm pretty sure John Williams might have even done the score for that as well. A very young Dakota Fanning. It was a very, very good movie, and it's a very fun, watchable movie. It's a really fun movie to watch.
You highlighted earlier that like, you know, I sort of like action Tom Cruise, and that's true. I do, with the exception of Jerry Maguire making my list. Yes. But I also love 80s Tom Cruise. Like there's so many movies that he did in the 80s. Like obviously Top Gun came out in the 80s. Days of Thunder. Days of Thunder is a funny one because it was also directed by Tony Scott. And I think they tried to like do a different sort of spin on Top Gun, and it just didn't work.
It was
Like,
essentially the same thing.
Yeah, because
Let's be real, it was good.
Yeah, Top Gun came out in 86 and Days of Thunder came out in 1990. And it just, they tried to like go again just in like sort of a NASCAR thing. And while Days of Thunder is like an 80s classic
It's so
sort of movie,
good.
it's
good.
Yeah, but like you look at his like 80s filmography, it's Days of Thunder, it's Cocktail, it's
Cocktail's such a good movie.
Cocktail is a great movie. It's
Risky Business.
I mentioned earlier, Risky Business. Jesus,
yeah.
Risky Business, Rain Man. Like
There's so many that could have been.
And then you've got a couple of I may have the dates off, but you've got he did a couple there with Nicole. Which he's got Eyes Wide Shut, and then there's another one. So it's like like honestly, like when I put together my top 5, it's actually a chore. Like it was really hard.
It was hard. I'll say this really quickly, because this is for anybody that grew up in the greater Toronto area. And anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about, that didn't grow up in the greater Toronto area, we had a theme park called Wonderland, and it's still around to this day. And they had do you know the soft spot that I have for Days of Thunder because of the ride Days of Thunder? And it was essentially like a movie theater interactive chair thing.
Yes, so good.
I don't know how to describe it, but it was just like
you're also forgetting, Brad, that at same Canada's Wonderland there was a ride called Top Gun.
Yes, because they were both produced by Paramount.
Paramount,
and it used to be called Paramount Canada's Wonderland. So there was all sorts of Paramount themed things. And Days of Thunder, they even had this is how cool it was. They even had the mellow yellow car out front. And when I was rolling through what movies, I actually almost put Days of Thunder in my top 5, just because then I started to run through this memory of going on that ride and being obsessed with it when I was a kid.
We gotta go, but I want to say one more, and I want to direct this at you, Brad, because you went for like really like Tom Cruise performance.
Yeah.
Honorable mention, Collateral.
Oh.
Yes.
Super underrated.
Cruise, yes, Jamie Tom Foxx. Cruise plays like he's like a villain in this movie. Him and Jamie Foxx are together the whole movie. Yes. It's really super underrated movie and a great Tom Cruise performance.
That's what I'm saying. And like, just to cap it, that's exactly all these things that we've mentioned, I think painted a very clear picture of what we were talking about. He, I think in general, just over his career, has been kind of underrated. And I don't want to put the cart before the horse here, but a lot of people, a lot of critics, a lot of people who have actually seen the movie already are saying this is one for the ages for Tom. Not just the movie, but his performance. And I'm hoping that this doesn't fall into the stigma of just like, well, it was a popcorn summer flick, so we're not going to give him the nod. If it's that good, give him the nod, because he's good. But that remains to be seen. We got to watch it.
All right, we're going to get out of here. I'm thinking we're not done talking about this movie. It's like we'll start to get like our like actual sort of audience reviews as we move into next week, and then we're actually going to see the movie the weekend after next. So really looking forward to that. If you don't want to miss that, hit that like and subscribe button below. Spread the word, tell your friends. We really appreciate it. Do the same thing if you're listening to the audio version. Hit that follow button, leave a review. Every little bit helps. We'll see you guys then.
I got the need.
For speed.
Goodbye, everybody.